In 1980, the NBA Finals were not broadcast live on television, not delayed by technical problems, not preempted by breaking news. Deliberately tape-delayed aired at 11:30 at night, after the local news, because CBS did not believe enough Americans would stay awake to watch it. The championship series of the most athletic sport in the world, played by the most gifted players in the world, was considered less worthy of prime time than a rerun. That is where the NBA was before Michael Jordan. What happened between that moment and the global phenomenon the league became is one of the most dramatic institutional turnarounds in the history of professional sports. And the reason the league needed turning around, the reason it had fallen so far that its own television partner refused to air its championship live, was not bad basketball. The basketball was extraordinary. The reason was cocaine. To understand how cocaine became the NBA's defining crisis, you have to understand what the league looked like in the late 1970s. The NBA had expanded aggressively through the 1970s, adding franchises faster than the market could support them. Attendance was declining in multiple cities. Television ratings were soft. The league's demographic was shifting in ways that made network executives nervous. The player base was becoming predominantly black at a time when American sports television was still calibrating how to market black athletes to white suburban audiences. That tension was real, it was documented, and it shaped every business decision the league made for a decade. Into that environment came cocaine. It did not arrive suddenly. It arrived the way most crises arrive gradually, then everywhere at once. By the early 1980s, cocaine was not a fringe problem in the NBA. It was not a handful of troubled players making bad choices. It was structural. It was normalized. Players have estimated, in interviews given years later, that somewhere between 40 and 75% of the league was using regularly during this period. Not occasionally, regularly. As part of the rhythm of a professional basketball season, the money made it possible. NBA contracts in the late 1970s and early 1980s had increased dramatically, putting more cash in the hands of young men in their early 20s than any previous generation of professional athletes had seen. The social environment made it inevitable. Cocaine in the early 1980s was not yet the public health emergency it would become by mid-decade. It was glamorous. It was everywhere in professional sports, in entertainment, in finance. The culture had not yet processed what it actually was. The NBA processed it the hard way. The first major public crisis came in 1980, when a series of investigations and player admissions began making the league's cocaine problem undeniable. Teams knew about individual players. Owners knew about teams. The league office knew about owners knowing. The information existed at every level of the organization and was managed, contained, and quietly ignored because the alternative, acknowledging the full scale of the problem, publicly threatened the league's already fragile relationship with its television partners and its sponsors. John Lucas was one of the most talented point guards of his generation. He was also one of the first NBA players whose cocaine addiction became publicly documented while he was still playing. Lucas has spoken openly in later years about the culture he was part of, the locker room dynamics, the social rituals, the way cocaine moved through the league, not as a secret, but as an open fact that everyone acknowledged and nobody addressed. David Thompson was another. A player so gifted that rival players and coaches have described him as someone who could have been the best in the league. His addiction cost him years of his prime. The NBA did not intervene. There was no infrastructure for intervention. There was no protocol. There was a problem, and there was silence around the problem, and there was basketball being played by men who were managing addictions while their employers looked away. The CBS deal told the whole story. In 1973, CBS had signed the NBA to a television contract. By the early 1980s, the relationship was deteriorating. Ratings for regular season games were declining. Advertisers were nervous about the league's image. And in 1981, CBS made the decision that became the defining symbol of how far the NBA had fallen. The finals would not air live. They would be tape delayed. The message that sent was not subtle. The network was saying, with its scheduling decision, that the NBA's championship was not worth competing for in prime time, that the audience for it was too small, too uncertain, or too demographically inconvenient to justify the investment of a live broadcast slot. For a league already fighting questions about its relevance, about its television appeal, about whether the American sports market actually wanted what it was selling. That tape delay decision was an institutional humiliation. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson saved the league before David Stern could fix it. That is the honest version of the timeline. The 1979 draft, which brought both players into the NBA simultaneously, Bird to Boston, Magic to Los Angeles, injected a rivalry so compelling, so perfectly constructed around contrasting styles and personalities and franchises, that it gave the league something to sell that transcended the cocaine crisis. Bird versus Magic gave CBS a reason to care again. It gave advertisers a narrative. It gave casual fans a reason to watch. The Celtics-Lakers rivalry of the early 1980s was not just great basketball. It was a commercial lifeline thrown to a league that was drowning. But the cocaine problem did not disappear because Bird and Magic arrived. It continued. It deepened in some franchises. And the public reckoning, when it finally came, was brutal. In June 1986, Len Bias died. He was 22 years old.
The medical examiners also found that Rogers had a healthy heart, and there were no signs of long-term drug use. A grand jury in Maryland began its investigation today into the cocaine death of basketball star Len Bias. They will hear testimony from 75 witnesses and will try to determine who gave the cocaine to Bias.
He had been selected second overall in the NBA draft by the Boston Celtics 2 days earlier. He was, by every scouting assessment, one of the most gifted players to enter the league in years. He died of cocaine intoxication in his college dormitory room the night after the draft. The timing was so stark it functioned almost like a metaphor. The NBA had spent years managing its cocaine problem quietly, containing it, hoping it would resolve itself or remain below the threshold of public scandal. Then a 22-year-old died 2 days after being drafted, and the management strategy collapsed entirely. The public conversation that followed was not just about Len Bias. It was about everything the league had been avoiding. The question being asked, in press rooms and in Congress and in network boardrooms, was not just how this specific tragedy had happened. It was how an entire professional sports league had allowed a cocaine culture to become so embedded that a player could die of an overdose the night he became a millionaire. David Stern had become commissioner in 1984. What he inherited was a league with extraordinary athletic talent, a compelling new rivalry in Bird and Magic, and a cocaine problem that was threatening to make all of it irrelevant. His response was the most aggressive drug testing program in American professional sports at that time. Players found to be using cocaine-faced suspension without pay for a first offense and permanent banishment for repeated violations. The policy was controversial. The players' union fought elements of it, but it was implemented, and it changed the culture of the league faster than most observers expected. By 1985, the worst of the crisis was functionally over in terms of active player usage at the level the early 1980s had seen. By 1986, Michael Jordan was in his second season and beginning to demonstrate what he would become. By 1988, the finals were airing live in primetime and drawing the kind of ratings CBS had once believed were impossible. The league that nobody had wanted to watch became the league that everyone wanted to watch in less than a decade. The cocaine era is not a footnote in NBA history. It is the context without which the Jordan era makes no sense. The reason Jordan's arrival felt like a rescue, the reason the marketing around him was so deliberately constructed around ideas of greatness and purity, competitive excellence, was because the league needed rescuing. The reason David Stern's tenure was celebrated as a transformation was because what existed before, it was genuinely in danger of failing. The NBA did not become the global phenomenon it is today, despite what happened in the 1980s. It became what it is today because of how it responded to what happened in the 1980s, because the crisis forced the institution to confront things it had been avoiding, to build systems it had been postponing, and to make decisions it had been deferring. Before Michael Jordan, the NBA was a cocaine league nobody wanted to watch. What came after was built on the wreckage of what that league had become and on the talent of the players who had survived it.